Hi, my name is Darlene. On Christmas Eve, my mother slammed the front door in my face while my 10-year-old son stood beside me holding a handmade card for his grandmother. Inside, the whole family kept laughing, like we had never existed. They didn't know I'm a general. They didn't know the man who came to pick me up was Grandma's driver. And he saluted me before telling me my private jet was ready. But the truth, the door they slammed wasn't the first. It was just the last in a long list of quiet rejections. They erased my name from invitations, cropped me out of photos, told my son he wasn't family enough to sit at the kids' table. Why do the people who say they love you hurt you in ways only strangers get blamed for? Do you want to know what I did next? The snowfall in Aspen that afternoon was steady, graceful, almost poetic. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine still running, watching the flakes melt against the windshield. Micah was in the back seat, humming Christmas songs under his breath as he buckled his jacket. He had insisted on wearing the same navy coat he wore last year, even though the sleeves were an inch too short. Said it made him look grown up. "Do you think Grandma will remember the cookies I liked?" he asked. I smiled, masking that familiar knot in my stomach. "She's got a memory like a steel trap, kiddo. How could she forget?" He grinned, holding a hand-cut Christmas card he'd made from green construction paper. Inside was a crayon drawing of him and Grandma sitting by the fireplace, the kind of innocent hope only a child could have. I, on the other hand, hadn't received a card. No formal invite, just a screenshot forwarded by my cousin on Facebook Messenger. The invitation said, "Annual Atwood Family Christmas Eve Gathering." That was it. No address, no time, no mention of me or my son. But I showed up anyway, because if I didn't, I'd be proving them right, that I didn't care, that I had detached. And if I did, well, they'd just pretend it was a surprise I came at all. As I pulled into the long, familiar driveway of the estate, the pit in my stomach deepened. The lights from the grand windows spilled across the snow like theater spotlights. Cars were parked bumper to bumper. Callista's Tesla, Uncle Wayne's Suburban, even Aunt June's rusted-out minivan. Micah leaned forward between the seats. "Why isn't our name on the sign?" I looked to where he pointed. On the wooden board near the front door, someone had taped a list of welcome guests. Every name was typed in gold foil lettering. Not ours. I turned off the engine, forced a smile. "Looks like they ran out of space." He nodded slowly, believing me. That's the thing about kids. They want to believe adults are better than they often are. We stepped inside, brushed off the snow. The air smelled like cinnamon, cloves, and something a little too sweet. Callista's perfume, maybe. A few heads turned. A couple of relatives nodded awkwardly. No one offered hugs. "Darlene, look who finally made it," Callista called out, gliding over in a red dress that looked like it belonged in a pageant. "Wouldn't miss it," I said dryly. She was flipping through a leather-bound photo album she just happened to be showing off to a group of aunts. "Here, we got all the good shots from last Christmas." Micah and I leaned in. I scanned each page. There was the tree, the turkey, the snowball fight, but I wasn't in a single photo. Neither was Micah. Even the group shot, there was a clear crop line where my shoulder should have been. My mouth went dry. My hands clenched the edges of my coat, but I didn't say a word. I just looked at my son, who thankfully hadn't noticed. I stepped back. "I think I'll grab a drink." In the kitchen, Vera was holding court with her friends from the neighborhood. She glanced up as I walked in but didn't say anything. Callista came up beside me again, her smile gleaming with something other than warmth. "You still doing that army thing?" Before I could respond, another cousin chimed in. "Wow, that's dedication. I don't know how you do it, especially with so little appreciation." I tilted my head. "Some of us serve quietly, others just serve themselves." Silence. I didn't wait for a reaction. I walked back out into the hallway and spotted Micah near the fireplace, still holding his card. He looked so proud, so ready to give. That's when the weight of it all hit me. Not for me, but for him. I had spent years being their afterthought, an accessory to their holidays, an extra seat they barely acknowledged. But now they were erasing him too. Not out of anger, but out of indifference, and that was so much worse. I stood in the corner of the room, my back to the wall, watching as laughter bounced off the walls without ever touching us. I felt invisible, but not powerless, because this time I wasn't going to pretend I didn't see it. This time I was taking notes. When your name doesn't appear on the card, it's not a mistake, it's a message. Micah's little voice broke through my storm of thoughts, and what he said next, it shattered me. Why does no one talk to us like they talk to everyone else? He wasn't whining. There was no bitterness in his tone, just quiet confusion, the kind only a child could carry. He had been watching all night, absorbing the way cousins giggled at inside jokes, the way his name never got called to come help set the table or pass out presents. I gripped the edge of my coffee cup a little tighter, the ceramic suddenly too hot in my hand. How could I tell him the truth? That even adults can be cruel in the softest voices. That sometimes being family doesn't protect you from being invisible. Instead, I met his eyes and said, "You stand your ground, even when no one salutes you. That's what a real leader does." He blinked, then nodded like he understood, more than he should have. We walked toward the kitchen, my hand gently resting on his back. The hallway narrowed as we passed clusters of relatives laughing in corners like they were still in high school. And just as we turned the bend toward the noise, Vera's voice sliced through the air like ice. "I didn't invite her. She just shows up every year like she still belongs here." She said it like I wasn't 3 feet away, like I wasn't her daughter, like Micah didn't exist. Callista gave a sharp laugh that faded the moment she saw me. Vera didn't even glance in our direction. She just kept walking, her hand full of glasses she never intended to offer me. Micah didn't ask what it meant. He didn't have to. I felt his small hand tighten around mine. I looked at her, dead in the eye, but I said nothing, because sometimes silence is the only language narcissists can't manipulate. We continued into the kitchen. I kept my posture straight, my expression unreadable, but inside I was already rearranging things. There would be no next time, not like this. At the drink table, I poured some punch for Micah. He stood beside me quietly, clutching his little green card. That same innocence in his grip made my chest hurt. Then an uncle I hadn't seen in years leaned down to Micah, flashing a whiskey smile. "I hope you grow up a little tougher than your mom, kid. You'll need it in this family." I didn't move, not at first. I just stared at his weathered hand resting too casually on Micah's shoulder. Then I stepped between them. "What makes you think he needs your kind of toughness?" His smile flickered. "Just saying. It's good to be resilient, that's all." "You confuse resilience with silence," I said calmly. "They're not the same." He backed off. Not because I raised my voice. I never had to. It was the look, the kind of look they only respected when it came from uniforms and ranks. I took Micah's hand again and led him toward the door. We needed air. I needed space. Outside, the wind had picked up. Snow swirled under the porch light in chaotic spirals, like even the weather couldn't decide whether to dance or fight. We stood beneath the awning, huddled in our coats. I could feel his small body lean into mine for warmth. "When someone stops seeing your humanity," I whispered, "the cold isn't just in the air, it's in their eyes." Micah didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His silence wasn't confusion anymore, it was understanding. At 10 years old, he knew what it meant to be pushed to the margins. He looked up at me. "Can we go home soon?" "Soon," I said, brushing the snow off his shoulders. "Very soon." And in that moment, something inside me hardened, not from pain, but from clarity, a knowing. I remembered something an old field officer once told me during a deployment in Kandahar. A line in the snow is only a line until someone crosses it. They had crossed it tonight, again, but this time they crossed it in front of my son. The rejection wasn't subtle anymore. It wasn't implied. It was declared, loud enough for children to hear and carry with them. I had let this cycle go on far too long. For years, I let them pretend I didn't belong. I gave them the benefit of the doubt over and over, thinking maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. It wasn't, and I was done playing that game. They thought they could erase me forever, but they forgot snow melts. It took all my discipline not to rip that ornament off the tree, but I knew my silence would speak louder soon. The living room had filled with more people since we'd first arrived. Laughter bounced off the vaulted ceilings, and someone had turned up the volume on the stereo just enough that conversation required leaning in. It wasn't chaos, just that specific brand of holiday noise that pretends to be joy. A classic Bing Crosby track floated through the speakers, one I hadn't heard in years. "I'll Be Home for Christmas," a song that always made me ache just a little. It dragged me backward to a Christmas when I was maybe 12, before Dad died, before Vera stopped pretending she liked having all her kids in one room. That year, I had gotten a hand-knit scarf from Grandma. She'd written a note. "To my soldier in training." That was before she knew I'd actually enlist, before I became someone that made my mother uncomfortable. Funny how nostalgia can sneak up on you when you least expect it. When people are absent long enough, you invent reasons to protect your heart. That's how I'd made peace with how things had become. But Micah hadn't yet. I felt a gentle tug on my sleeve. "Mom?" I turned to him. He looked up, eyes serious in that way that only a 10-year-old who'd seen too much could carry. "What does it mean when people forget you on purpose?" My throat tightened. Of all the questions I'd braced for, that wasn't one I could have prepared for. And he hadn't meant it as an accusation. He was trying to understand. He wasn't hurt. He was confused. I dropped to one knee, cupping his face in my hands. "It means they see only what they want to, but will never become them, okay?" He nodded slowly, then looked down at the card he was still holding, the crayon starting to smudge from his fingers. As we stood, we passed by the tree again, grand, over-decorated, artificial in more ways than one. My gaze caught on a familiar ornament, a ceramic snowflake, hand-painted in muted blues and golds. I'd made it when I was still in basic training, during a rare quiet night in the mess hall. I had sent it home as a reminder, a piece of me. Now, it hung with a glossy white tag that read, "Handmade by Callista." Micah reached out toward it. Before he could touch it, Callista's voice cut through the air. "Don't touch that!" Every eye in the room turned. Her voice hadn't been loud, but it had snapped the warmth out of the air. Micah's hand froze mid-air. He looked at me like he didn't know whether to cry or apologize. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, bud. That ornament's just confused. It forgot who gave it life." Callista blinked, lips parting slightly, but she said nothing. I stepped back, guided Micah toward the fireplace. My hands shook, but not from nerves, just from the kind of fury that simmers low and steady. That's the genius of exclusion. It doesn't need to shout to leave bruises. My family never had to scream at me to let me know I didn't belong. They just rewrote the story, page by page, until I was a footnote, then an erasure. There had been moments, plenty, where I'd given them chances, asked them to talk, asked if I'd done something wrong. Always, the answers were vague, smoothed over with phrases like, "You're just sensitive," or "Don't make this about you." I stood there, arms folded, watching them exchange gifts, hugging, laughing, clinking glasses. It was like watching a play where everyone knew their lines, except me. A cousin I barely knew wandered over, drink in hand. "You always were quiet," he said. "Still observing everything?" I gave him a slow smile. Observing used to feel like belonging. Now it feels like evidence. He laughed politely, not getting it, and wandered off toward the dessert table. I stayed near the fire, the heat doing little to warm the numbness creeping up my spine. They could rewrite the past all they wanted, but the truth, it was still hanging there, painted in my handwriting. The laughter echoed from the main living room, but it didn't reach us. Micah and I stood quietly near the edge of the seating area, far enough not to block the view of the fireplace, close enough to still pretend we belonged. They were playing a holiday gift game, one of those white elephant exchanges where everyone made exaggerated gasps at dollar store novelties wrapped in glitter paper. Children's names were called one by one for special mentions. Each grandchild stepped up to loud applause, posed for pictures with Grandma Vera, and received personalized stockings stuffed with tiny trinkets and gift cards. Micah held the card he made in both hands, fidgeting with the corner. "I think they forgot me," he whispered. I bent toward him. Being loved loudly doesn't always mean being loved truly. He nodded, but I could tell it wasn't a lesson he wanted to learn tonight. The room erupted in claps again. Callista presented Elowen with a thick, wrapped box, practically singing her name like she was being introduced at a pageant. "Isn't she thoughtful?" she beamed, holding up a pair of handmade mittens Elowen had supposedly knitted. Vera cupped Elowen's cheek, kissed her forehead, and said loudly, "This one always thinks of others." Micah stepped forward slightly. His card had red smudges on the corner now, the glue stick failing to hold the paper snowflake he had cut out himself. He didn't say a word, just waited, standing there with quiet hope. Vera glanced past him, then turned away. She moved to the next child. Micah stepped back and slid the card into his jacket pocket without a word. I tightened my grip on his shoulder, not to comfort him, but to steady myself. The silence in the room was louder than any insult could have been. Callista glanced in our direction, but she didn't smile. Not really. Just that tight curl of the lips that said, "This isn't about you." Later, while Micah nibbled on a sugar cookie someone had tossed on a napkin, a small cousin approached me, maybe 6 years old. She tugged on my sleeve and held something up. "This was in the hallway," she said. "Someone said it got left behind, so I gave it back." It was the card, Micah's card. I took it gently, unfolding the soft creases in the paper. His handwriting slanted up awkwardly. "To Grandma. Love, Micah." The crayon heart next to his name had partially faded. He had never let go of it. They had. I stared at the card for a long moment, then folded it again, slipping it into my coat's inner pocket like a classified document. The holiday lights on the tree flickered in soft rhythms. The smell of pine-scented candles filled the room, but it was hollow, a fragrance trying too hard to cover something rotting underneath. I excused myself, walking through the side door that led to the porch. The night had darkened fully now, and snowflakes danced like weightless whispers. I walked to the edge of the deck and looked out at the mountains in the distance. Still, frozen, ancient. They didn't move for anyone, and tonight, neither would I. I thought of something my instructor once said during officer training. The most dangerous soldier isn't the loudest. It's the one who stopped asking for orders. I'd stopped asking for inclusion, for space, for basic decency. I'd spent years making excuses for them, told myself they were busy, tired, distracted, dealing with their own problems. But tonight, I saw it for what it was, not neglect, not oversight, deliberate erasure. And now they had tried to do the same to Micah. They crossed the line. I turned back toward the house, watching them through the window, faces full of cheer, drinks raised, stories told. Not one of them looked outside. Inside that world, we didn't exist. But outside, I existed more than ever. Back inside, I found Micah sitting on the staircase near the coat closet, chin resting on his knees. "I don't want to be here anymore," he said without looking up. I sat beside him, pulled his coat over his shoulders, and zipped it gently. "I know," I said, "and I won't make you stay where we're not seen." He leaned against me, no longer asking questions. That was the part that hit me the hardest. Not that he was hurt, but that he had accepted it. This was no longer just a family event gone wrong. It was a system that had been preserved, uninterrupted, for decades. Not anymore. I stood, offered him my hand. He took it without hesitation. I wasn't just enduring anymore. I was calculating. I had come hoping they'd change. But what I found was a family allergic to truth. I wasn't walking out because I was broken. I was walking out because I finally remembered who I was. I stayed quiet, but I wasn't still. My eyes scanned the room while my mind sorted through everything they'd shown me tonight, what they'd said, what they hadn't, and what they wanted me to believe without having the guts to say out loud. Micah was back with his cousins, sitting on the rug with a toy helicopter someone had brought. He wasn't laughing. He was watching, just like I had watched at his age. He was learning what love looked like and what it didn't. Near the dining room, Vera and Callista were huddled close with Sable, Callista's sister-in-law. They weren't whispering, but they weren't exactly loud either. I didn't mean to overhear, but when they talked about money, their voices always floated a little further. "Three-way split between the rightful kids makes the most sense," Sable said. "Exactly," Callista replied. "I mean, we've been here. We've stayed close. She just pops in once a year and acts like she's entitled to the same piece." I stepped into the room. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to be seen, enough to be heard. Vera's eyes met mine and didn't blink. She didn't flinch. That was always her strength, and her weakness. "Rightful?" I asked. I didn't know family came with entry tests. Sable turned red. Callista crossed her arms, letting her silence fill the space where a fake apology might have lived. I held their gaze for a beat too long, then turned around and walked back toward the rear patio. Micah followed me. Radar, the old hunting dog Grandma had rescued years ago, came bounding up from the garden, tail wagging like he'd found his long-lost human. He barked once, nudging his head against my thigh. "Radar!" Micah giggled and reached out. Just then, the sliding door creaked behind us, and Callista's voice pierced the air. "Get back here! Don't touch her!" Radar froze. His tail dropped. He whimpered and slinked backward, confused, betrayed in the way only dogs know. Micah looked up at me, voice so quiet it almost hurt to hear. "Even Radar's not allowed to like us." I knelt down and stroked Radar's head. "It's not about him," I said. "Some people don't know how to handle what they didn't control." Radar licked my fingers and sat beside me like he remembered everything I'd ever whispered to him during long nights when I'd visit Grandma and no one else wanted to talk. That was when it all clicked for me. This wasn't about tonight. This wasn't about a card or an ornament or even the inheritance. It was about a pattern so ingrained, so rehearsed, that they didn't even recognize it anymore. They weren't cruel by accident. They were careful by design. Exclusion isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in who they stop trusting to walk through the house without suspicion, who they let hold the family heirloom without commentary, who they ask for help moving a table, and who they pretend isn't even in the room. Grandma once told me, they'll remember your silence more than your shouts. Use it wisely. Tonight, I used it like a blade. Back inside, I stood near the coat rack. The living room was lit golden with warm light. Micah stood by my side, looking up at me. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, then tilted his head. "Are you?" I smiled. A real one this time. Getting there. I looked at the coats, lined up, pressed, labeled with names stitched into fabric like they were claiming their place in history. Mine hung without a tag. Just there. Present, but unclaimed. There's a moment, I whispered to myself, where you stop trying to change them and start preparing to change your direction. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to demand an explanation or a seat or a title in the will. I was going to walk, not in shame, not in anger, but in full possession of myself. Because leaving without asking permission, that was my declaration. I wasn't walking out because I was broken. I was walking out because I finally remembered who I was. It was time they saw what strength looked like when it didn't ask for permission. I moved through the house like a ghost, unnoticed except by the weight of my own decision. Laughter bubbled from the dining room as silverware clinked and wine flowed. No one noticed me collecting Micah's coat from the rack, or the way I folded it carefully over my arm, smoothing it like a final gesture of care before battle. Micah trailed behind me quietly. His cheeks were flushed from the heat inside and from something else I couldn't name. He still held that card, the one he'd made for Grandma. The edges were soft now from how many times his fingers had turned it over, waiting for the right moment that never came. As we stepped into the front hallway, the distant murmur of storytelling and toasts grew louder, filling the silence between us. My hand tightened around the doorknob, not from hesitation, but from resolve. This wasn't retreat. This was extraction. "Leaving already?" Vera's voice sliced through the quiet like the crack of a whip. I turned. She stood a few feet away, arms folded, mouth curled in a half smirk. "We didn't even notice you arrived," she added, and I could see Callista standing just behind her, sipping something from a crystal glass with too much interest. I took a breath. "That's the story of my life here, isn't it?" She didn't blink. "Go home. There's no room left anyway." Then she reached past me and pushed the door closed. Hard. It slammed with a finality that echoed louder than the music still playing inside. Micah stood frozen, not from the cold, but from something deeper. I turned toward him, ready to speak, but he beat me to it. "Did I do something wrong, Mom?" The question broke something in me that years of silence hadn't touched. I knelt beside him, eyes level with his. "No, baby, you did nothing wrong. Then why don't they want us?" His voice cracked. I pulled him into my arms. "What's wrong isn't you. It's how some people choose to love, and how they decide who's worth it." His body relaxed just enough to let me hold the pain for both of us. Inside, I could still hear the muffled cheer, the forks clinking against porcelain, another story being told with names I hadn't heard in a decade, and not once, not one voice called after us. We stepped away from the door. Each step through the snow was a declaration, clean, silent, final. Some exits don't need grand speeches, just clean steps in the snow. Micah clutched the card tighter, and I watched his small footprints fill in behind mine. I didn't have a destination yet, just the clarity that I wouldn't walk this direction again. I was never going to change them, but I could protect him. That was the only mission that mattered now. As we reached the car, I opened the door and helped him in. He didn't speak. He just buckled his seatbelt and pulled his hood up, eyes already heavy with the weight of the day. Before I turned the key, I looked back at the house. The lights glowed softly in the windows. The porch was still. No one had followed. No one cared enough to pretend. I thought of all the times I'd stood in that house, waiting for someone to notice. I'd waited through birthdays, holidays, even funerals, hoping they'd see something other than obligation in my face. Not anymore. Some families make you. Some teach you what never to become. Micah's breathing slowed in the back seat. He was already half asleep, wrapped in his coat, clutching that bent little card. I turned the ignition. I wasn't just leaving their house. I was resigning from the role they wrote for me. Snow had begun to pile up on the windshield by the time I reached the car. The porch light behind us glowed weakly, casting long shadows across the driveway. No one had followed, no one called my name, and yet my phone vibrated in my coat pocket, lit up with the familiar glare of a notification. Instagram. I opened it out of habit, not urgency. A photo had been posted. Callista, smiling by the family tree, holding up a ceramic ornament. My ornament, the one I painted by hand during deployment. The caption read, "Love how she makes the family tree ornaments every year." The post was tagged with "Hot Atwood traditions" and heart emojis. They didn't just steal what I gave, they stole what I stood for. I stared at it for a long moment, the edges of the image blurring as my fingers tightened around the phone. They had replaced my name with hers, and no one questioned it, not even the ones who knew. That was the part that burned the most, complicity dressed as tradition. Micah climbed into the back seat quietly. He pulled the door closed but didn't buckle up right away. He was staring at his own phone. "Mom?" he said gently. I turned to him. "Yeah? Why would someone want to make fun of us?" He turned the screen toward me. A 10-second video looped again and again. It showed me standing on the porch earlier, right after the door had been slammed. The clip had a caption overlaid in bold, sarcastic font. "The estranged aunt nobody asked for." Posted by Zinnia. The comment section was a battlefield. Some laughed, others defended. A few asked, "Who even is she?" I locked my phone and slid it into the console. "That wasn't about us," I said. "That was about what they're willing to lose to protect a lie." Micah stared out the window. The card still peeked from his coat pocket. I rested my hand over his. "You're not invisible, not to me." For a while, we sat in the car without speaking. The snow kept falling. It was quiet, but not peaceful. Just that particular kind of quiet that lingers after a wound has been opened and left untended. I remembered something Grandma once said after a fight broke out at a family barbecue years ago. "There's a reason snakes don't make noise. They don't need to." This wasn't neglect. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was architecture. I wasn't written out by mistake. I was omitted with intention. They silenced me not because they forgot, but because they knew I remembered too much. My phone buzzed again. This time I didn't check. I unlocked the screen just long enough to open a text window and send Grandma a single sentence. "I'll be in touch soon." Tonight was clarifying. I set the phone to airplane mode. No calls, no texts, no digital apologies from people who only spoke when there were witnesses. In the dim cabin light of the car, I opened my notepad app and started a new document. I titled it, "Timeline Evidence." I wasn't drafting a response. I was documenting a war. I looked over my shoulder. Micah had finally buckled in. His head rested against the window, eyes half closed, the kind of exhaustion only a quiet heartbreak can bring. I gently turned the key, but didn't start the engine yet. A battle doesn't always start with noise, I murmured to myself. Sometimes it begins with who chooses to leave first. I had always waited for a breaking point, but this time I was choosing precision. If they wanted to erase me, they should have burned the records too. I wasn't their scapegoat, I was their mirror. And mirrors? They break what can't face the truth. They closed the door on me, but the world opened something far greater. I had just helped Micah into the back seat, clicking his belt quietly when headlights swept across the driveway. Another vehicle pulled into the estate entrance, steady and slow, not a guest's car, too clean, too deliberate. I didn't recognize it at first, but the second the door opened and Clayton stepped out in his pressed coat and gloves, my breath hitched. He walked with the unhurried pace of a man on a mission, no hesitation, no confusion. His steps didn't falter even as the snow thickened around him. Then he stopped 3 feet from me, removed his hat, and saluted. "General," he said in that calm, clipped tone that used to make recruits stand up straighter. "Your aircraft is on standby. Ma'am, your mother instructed me to escort you personally." Everything fell silent behind me. I could feel it, even without turning, like the heat from a fire that suddenly extinguishes. Somewhere from a second-floor window, I heard the creak of a curtain being pulled back. Clayton's voice hadn't been loud, but the way he said, "General," made the world still. I nodded once and returned the gesture with a quiet, "Understood." Neighbors who had been saying their goodbyes turned toward the driveway. From the corner of my eye, I saw Aunt Janet press a hand to her mouth. Uncle Wayne muttered something under his breath that sounded a lot like, "I'll be damned." I turned back to Micah and helped him out again. "Hold tight for a second, buddy." Inside the house, the laughter had begun to fade. Callista stood near the fireplace, wine glass in hand, whispering to someone beside her. I couldn't hear what she said, but I caught the tone. Vera stood frozen in place, one hand gripping the back of a chair. "She always had a flair for drama," she muttered, but it sounded like she was trying to convince herself more than anyone else. Callista whispered, "Wait, did he say general?" I stepped 1 foot toward the porch just as the television over the fireplace flickered on by itself. The music stopped. The room shifted as heads turned, puzzled at the sudden change. On screen, in sharp resolution, was Grandma's face. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, her eyes brighter than I'd seen in years. "Is this thing on?" she asked, then looked directly into the camera. "Good." Her voice boomed from the sound system like a judge entering a courtroom. "I saw everything," she said. "This is my home. Who gave you the right to dismiss my guest? My granddaughter?" Vera stammered. "Mother, it's not what—" "Don't lie to me, Vera." Her voice turned steel. "You've spent years trying to convince everyone that Darlene walked away, but I know the truth. You pushed her out." Callista stepped forward. "Grandma, we were just— enough. You all showed me who you really are. And now I'm going to do the same." Gasps echoed through the room. "This house," she continued, "will have a new deed by morning. I will not die leaving it to liars." Someone knocked over a glass. No one picked it up. Cousin Robert whispered to his wife, "They lied to all of us." Aunt Marcia was already walking toward the coat closet. People started leaving. Some left in silence. Some glared at Vera. A few patted me on the shoulder as they passed, eyes full of something I hadn't seen in years. Respect. I didn't say a word. Clayton opened the car door for me. I took one last look at the house, not with longing, but with clarity. Micah was already seated, looking at me. "You okay, Mom?" I smiled. "I am now." As I got into the car, Clayton nodded and closed the door behind me. We pulled away slowly, the estate shrinking behind us. I didn't turn around. Power doesn't always shout. Tonight, it saluted. They thought cutting me out would keep the peace. But some peace deserves to be shattered. By the time the sun rose over Aspen on Christmas morning, the house had grown cold, not from the snow outside, but from the silence inside. Decorations still blinked on timers, garlands still draped across the staircase, but no one moved like it was Christmas. The joy had drained out like air from a punctured tire. At exactly 8:02 a.m., the doorbell rang. Vera answered it with hair still unbrushed and makeup smudged from the night before. A courier handed her a thick envelope, crisp and sealed in legal weight paper. She opened it in the living room with Callista hovering behind her. I wasn't there to see it, but I could imagine every second of it. As of this date, Vera read aloud, her voice growing quieter, I, Marlene Atwood, rescind all estate inheritance previously assigned to Vera Atwood and Callista Ray. Callista's face crumbled. She grabbed the letter from her mother's hands, reading it as if the words might change on a second glance. No, this isn't real, she whispered. It's real, said a voice from the kitchen, Uncle Wayne, who'd already seen the writing on the wall. She told me yesterday she was tired of the pretending. Callista dropped onto the couch, hands shaking. Vera said nothing. She just stared at the letter, blinking like it was in another language. You promised me, Callista said suddenly, her voice sharp. You promised she'd never take our place. Vera's lips barely moved. It's just a misunderstanding. I'll call her. No, Callista snapped. You let your pride write us out of our own family. The silence that followed wasn't the kind that gave space for healing. It was the kind that confirmed fractures had been waiting for decades. Cousins shifted uncomfortably. Aunt Marcia grabbed her coat without a word. Two of the teenage grandkids looked at each other, unsure if they were allowed to speak. Honestly, one cousin murmured to his wife, Darlene always carried herself with more grace than any of them. Someone else added, We believed the wrong version of the story for too long. People began leaving, some to beat the snowstorm, others to avoid the fallout. No one touched the breakfast buffet. The waffles sat cold under the warming lamp, the orange juice congealed with pulp. Meanwhile, miles away, I was driving through the mountain roads with Micah in the back seat, earbuds in, head resting against the window. Snow brushed the edges of the windshield like feathers against glass. Peaceful, but not without weight. I glanced at him through the mirror. He looked calm now, somewhere between exhaustion and calm understanding. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I didn't win, I thought. There were no winners. There was just what was right, and I finally chose it. The car was quiet except for the soft shuffle of tires over icy roads and the occasional sniff from Micah. At a red light, I reached into the glove box to grab tissues and found something folded, a note. My name was scribbled on the outside in Clayton's handwriting. I knew you'd leave without making a fuss. That's why I left this. Grandma. I unfolded it slowly. Her words were careful, not dramatic, just her voice, distilled into ink. You stood alone, but not unseen. Everything I had, I now place in the hands that never let go of what mattered. I held it for a long time, the warmth of the paper oddly grounding. No ceremony, no applause, just truth and choice. Micah stirred and looked up at me. You okay, Mom? I smiled. Yeah, baby, I'm more than okay. He nodded, then leaned back into the seat, pulling his hood over his eyes. They thought cutting me out would keep the peace. But some peace deserves to be shattered. They mistook my silence for weakness, but silence, when earned, is louder than any defense. It was just past 4 in the afternoon when I finally turned my phone back on. We'd checked into a modest inn outside of Aspen, No fireplace, no five-star breakfast, just quiet. That was enough. The screen lit up with dozens of missed notifications, most of them from numbers I didn't recognize anymore. Group threads had exploded. Screenshots, links, reactions. I didn't dive in. I scrolled just enough to get the shape of what had happened while I was gone. The TikTok clip Zinnia had posted, the one mocking me, had taken an unexpected turn. Someone had traced the tag back to Callista's account and realized who I was. A wave of veterans began sharing the clip, not as mockery, but as a rallying point. They'd added a different caption. She stood quiet and still outranked them all. Some dug deeper, sharing news clippings from the base, old photos from my deployments. There was even a quote from an interview I did years ago after a humanitarian mission in Haiti. I'd forgotten I ever gave it. One woman I hadn't spoken to since college messaged me, "I'm sorry, we should have asked you more and assumed less." I remembered something Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "Do what you feel in your heart to be right, for you'll be criticized anyway." Turns out, I'd done something right. Across town, things were cracking open. Callista was the first to crack. Lucas, her ex-boyfriend from college, had left a comment on one of the reshared videos. Darlene always had this calm power. You knew she was someone, even before you knew what she did. It wasn't long, but it was enough. The comment got thousands of likes, screenshots, reposts. Family chats lit up like a fuse had been dropped. And when Callista saw it, she snapped. She blamed me, threw her phone at the wall hard enough to crack it. Aunt June tried to calm her, but she screamed at her too. "You all let her walk away with everything," she yelled, "and now you're cheering for her?" No one answered, because somewhere deep down, they knew this wasn't about what I took. It was about what I never asked permission to be. Later that day, I stopped at a small cafe on the edge of town. I needed air, a drink, something normal. I wore an old hoodie, no makeup, hair tied back. I ordered a coffee, stood to the side as I waited. A man in line behind me glanced at me, then at the barista and asked, "Is she staff here? Thought maybe she could clear this for me." Before I could respond, the barista smiled and said, "That's the woman they've been talking about online. That's her." The man blinked, embarrassed. I smiled politely. They erased me for years, I thought. Now they can't rewrite what's gone viral. I stepped back out into the snow, coffee in hand, the bitterness of it grounding me. I climbed into the car, pulled the door shut, and pressed play on a voicemail I'd been avoiding. It was Grandma. Her voice crackled softly. "You didn't just leave the house. You left the legacy I was ashamed of. And that's why I'm proud of you." I closed my eyes and let the warmth of her words thaw something I hadn't realized had gone cold. That night, I read through the legal email confirming the full transfer of the Highland property. The documents were clean. Grandma had signed it all. I didn't share it. I didn't post screenshots. I didn't call to gloat. Meanwhile, Vera had started deleting comments from her Facebook page. People were tagging the estate lawyer, asking questions, sharing articles. Her passive-aggressive post about choosing peace earned her exactly 1 like, and even that was probably by mistake. Callista posted a vague story about healing being messy. No one responded. The truth had gotten out, and it didn't need my voice to carry it. They mistook my silence for weakness, but silence, when earned, is louder than any defense. They chose their silence. I chose my peace. The snow had melted in patches around Colorado Springs, leaving behind slush-streaked sidewalks and brittle grass. The holidays were over. Outside, the world had moved on. Inside, I was just beginning to unpack. Micah was the first to shed the weight. As soon as we walked through the door, he ran to his room like he'd never left it, pulling out Legos and dumping them across the carpet. It was as if nothing had happened. Or maybe it had, and he'd already learned what I had taken decades to accept. Some things aren't worth clinging to. I stood in the middle of our living room, coat still on, suitcase half zipped. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of clarity, of clean air. Every object in that room carried new meaning now. A photo frame on the shelf, the pair of boots by the door, even the faint scent of cinnamon left in the kitchen from a candle I forgot to blow out before we left. He bounced back faster than I did, I thought, watching Micah build a tower taller than his elbows. Maybe children instinctively know who matters. I placed my phone on the counter. The screen was lit with new notifications, messages I had no interest in reading. I swiped them away, but my eye caught two names, Vera and Callista. The previews were what you'd expect. Sorry if things got out of hand. You misunderstood the tone. Not apologies, not acknowledgments, just press releases for damage control. I opened the message thread, looked at it for 3 full seconds. Then I hit delete. They didn't apologize for what they did, only for how it looked. I made breakfast without turning on the news. Just eggs, toast, and orange slices. Micah sat at the kitchen table, barefoot, humming quietly, his plate untouched as he focused on a piece of paper in front of him. "What are you drawing?" I asked. "A house," he said without looking up. "It's got only 2 people. And a dog." He held it up. Crayon lines, blue windows, one tall figure, one smaller, both smiling. "It's you and me," he added, like I needed the clarification. I blinked away something hot behind my eyes, not from pain, just recognition of what we had, of what we were rebuilding. This is our new legacy, I thought. Quiet, but unshakable. That afternoon, while Micah napped on the couch under his favorite blanket, I opened my laptop. Among the emails waiting for me was one from a local veterans board. Subject line, "General Darlene Atwood, we'd be honored." They were inviting me to speak at a community ceremony next month. Nothing grand, just a gathering to honor women who served and who led. I stared at the screen for a moment, not because I was surprised, but because for the first time in years, someone had seen me without my family's filter. They saw the version of me that didn't need to shrink. I clicked reply. I accepted. Later that night, I sat by the window with a mug of peppermint tea, watching the city glow beneath a lavender sky. It was the kind of evening that would have once made me restless, made me want to fix something, to call, to explain, to mend. But not now. Now, I understood something else entirely. I didn't lose a family. I lost a fantasy and gained my freedom. Letting go doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it feels like standing in the middle of your own life and realizing no one's left to disappoint but yourself. And that's a kind of peace I could finally live with. Sometimes, I whispered to myself, the most powerful thing you can do is simply not return. They chose their silence. I chose my peace. The envelope was thick, no logo, no frills, just a certified delivery stamp on the corner and 2 names written in bold, Vera Atwood and Callista Ray. They must have opened it together. Inside was a folded letter, printed on standard paper. 3 short lines. "You taught me everything I shouldn't be. You erased me. I returned the favor. You are no longer part of my story. No signature, no handwritten note, just the deed to the house. Legally transferred, irrevocably signed, and officially mine." That was it. Somewhere in that moment, I imagined Vera's hand trembling, not because she lost a house, but because she lost the illusion of control. And Callista? She likely screamed first, then cried second, then went online to find someone else to blame. But I didn't know for sure. I didn't need to. Because by then, the story wasn't mine to explain anymore. It was public, and I hadn't said a single word. An old video of Grandma resurfaced on Facebook, a clip from a family reunion 5 years ago. She was sitting in a lawn chair under the sun, sipping iced tea, looking straight into the camera as someone asked, "Who's the real backbone of this family?" She smiled and said, "The strongest ones never have to yell to be heard." The comments flooded in under the post. That's what happens when you forget who really held the legacy. She saw the truth years before the rest of us did. She left it all to the only one who never asked for it. I didn't respond to any of it, but I read them, every single one. A week later, Micah came home with a poster board folded in half, decorated with glitter and construction paper. "School project," he said. "Heroes. I picked you." He'd drawn a picture of me in uniform on one side, and on the other, he'd written in large, wobbly letters, "She didn't just serve her country, she served our truth." I didn't cry. I framed it. That night, I went into the small office at the back of the house, the one that still smelled faintly of paper and citrus oil, and hung Grandma's photo above my desk, black and white. Her chin lifted slightly, like she always did when she meant business. Underneath, a brass plaque I had custom engraved. "She saw me before the world did." I sat in that chair for a long time with a cup of tea, eyes locked on hers. "Thank you," I whispered, "for handing me the sword when I didn't even know I was at war." A new voicemail buzzed on my phone. From Vera. I didn't open it. I didn't need to hear her voice to know it was desperate. Maybe even apologetic. Maybe she cried. Maybe she used the words mistake or misunderstood. Maybe she asked me to call back for the sake of keeping things civil. I didn't play it. I deleted it without listening. Some victories don't need a reply. They live in the quiet, in the rebuilding. I turned off the lamp, walked to the window, and looked out over the neighborhood. The lights were dimming, one house at a time. A dog barked in the distance. Nothing dramatic, just life continuing. I closed the curtain. The door they slammed shut. I rebuilt into a wall, with my name carved across it.